5 hours after his final breath, Andy Griffith was gone. What really happened in his last moments? And what message did he leave behind? And why did their final conversation remain unspoken for years? On a quiet morning in July 2012, something unprecedented happened in Hollywood. America's most beloved sheriff was laid to rest, just 5 hours after drawing his final breath. From his untold secrets to very shocking truths, everything is very surprising. Before those final moments, let's take a look at his final years and the mystery. On the morning of July 3, 2012, Americans woke to the news that Andy Griffith, the gentle sheriff of Mayberry, who had been part of their lives for more than 50 years, had passed away. The announcement was sad enough, but what followed left many stunned. Within just 5 hours, Andy was laid to rest in a small private ceremony on his cherished Oak Island. There was no public service, no procession for fans to gather, no formal farewell for the man whose voice and values had filled living rooms for generations. Funeral experts called it unusual. Larry F. Stegall, head of North Carolina's Funeral Directors Association, said that in more than 3 decades of work, he had never heard of such a quick burial. Now I'm going to reveal a fact that 99% don't know. It wasn't an accident or a rushed decision. Andy had arranged it all himself, every detail, long before his final morning came. It was the ending he wanted, shaped by private choices and a quiet resolve that only became clear after he was gone. The off-camera reality of Andy will surprise you above everything else. For 8 seasons, Andy Griffith portrayed Sheriff Andy Taylor with such authenticity, but millions believed they knew the man behind the badge. His warm drawl, gentle wisdom, and folksy charm made him America's television father, a role that would define not just his career, but his very identity. Yet the real Andy Griffith was far more complex than the character who wrestled his way to the fishing hole each week. Those who worked alongside him knew a different truth. Most of us were deathly afraid of Andy. Recall George Lindsay, who played Goober Pyle. The star had what insiders described as white-hot rages that were unbearable, moments when the gentle sheriff disappeared entirely. During one particularly intense fight with his first wife, Barbara, Griffith's anger was so explosive that he punched out a car's windshield. The contradiction was stark. America's symbol of patience and understanding struggled privately with anger so intense he sought therapy for over a dozen years to control it. This internal struggle stemmed from his on-side-of-the-tracks upbringing in Mount Airy, North Carolina, where young Andy often felt looked down upon. The pain of that childhood, combined with the pressure of living up to an impossible television standard, created a man caught between 2 identities, the beloved Andy Taylor and the flawed human being who portrayed him. Andy Griffith's most difficult role was one fans never saw. By 1983, at the height of his career, Andy Griffith's body began betraying him in ways that would reshape the rest of his life. Shortly after marrying his 3rd wife, Cindy Knight, a seemingly routine case of the flu transformed into something far more sinister. What started as typical influenza symptoms evolved into searing, ricocheting pain throughout his entire body. The diagnosis was Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare autoimmune disorder that attacks the peripheral nervous system. For 7 months, Griffith was paralyzed from the knees down, unable to walk, trapped in a body that had turned against him. I had terrible, searing pain that ricocheted through my entire body, he later recalled. The man who had portrayed strength and reliability on screen found himself completely helpless, dependent on others for the most basic functions of life. But this was only the beginning of Andy's physical struggles. In 2000, he suffered a heart attack that required quadruple bypass surgery. The procedure left him weakened but alive, a preview of the cardiovascular disease that would ultimately claim his life. By 2007, a fall resulted in hip surgery, and his once strong body continued its steady decline. Behind a smile, Andy carried 2 lifelong regrets in silence. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of Andy Griffith's later years was the accumulation of regrets that weighed heavily on his conscience. The most devastating of these centered on his relationship with his adopted son, Sam Griffith Jr. Sam, who had struggled with alcoholism throughout his adult life, died in 1996 at just 38 years old. At the time of Sam's death, father and son were estranged, a reality that haunted Andy for the remaining 16 years of his life. Sam's passing affected him on a very deep level. Recalled his daughter Dixie. Andy had paid for Sam's rehabilitation twice, desperately trying to save his son, but their relationship had been fractured beyond repair. The guilt of this failure, the inability of television's most famous father to save his own child, became a burden Andy carried in silence. Adding to his emotional weight was the long-standing rift with Frances Bavier, who played Aunt Bee. Their on-set relationship had been strained, with Bavier often clashing with the more casual atmosphere that Andy and his co-stars preferred. Years of professional tension had created personal distance, and as both actors aged, the unresolved conflict became another source of private anguish. In her last breath, Aunt Bee revealed a hidden truth. In a moment that would later parallel Andy's own final words, Frances Bavier reached out to him near the end of her life with a heartbreaking apology. Knowing she was dying of cancer, Bavier called Andy to make amends for their years of professional conflict. Her words were simple but profound. "I'm sorry we didn't get along better. It was my fault. I just wish we had got along better. You ran the show and you made the show a success. I'm just sorry we didn't get along better." This unexpected reconciliation revealed the depth of regret that both actors had carried. Bavier, who had always been portrayed as difficult and demanding, took full responsibility for their strained relationship. Her final words to Andy demonstrated that beneath the professional tensions lay genuine respect and, perhaps, even affection that had never been properly expressed during their years of working together. The call deeply affected Andy, who had his own regrets about how their relationship had deteriorated after the show ended. Bavier had hoped to remain friends with Andy, but once the camera stopped rolling, he had forgotten all about her, leaving her heartbroken. Now, facing her own mortality, she was extending the olive branch that neither had offered during their healthier years. What happened in the hours before Andy Griffith's final breath? On July 2nd, 2012, Andy Griffith's long-struggled cardiovascular system began its final breakdown. The death certificate would later reveal that he suffered a heart attack 24 hours before his death, a prolonged cardiac event that marked the beginning of his final hours. His wife Cindy was by his side as his condition deteriorated throughout that Monday night, watching helplessly as the man who had brought joy to millions fought his last battle. The 911 call Cindy made revealed the desperation of those final moments. "He has lost consciousness. He's drooling out of his mouth. He's not breathing. He's slumped over. I can't feel a pulse," she told the emergency dispatcher. Andy had been ill all night, and the final heart attack occurred when he tried to move into his wheelchair. At 7 a.m. on July 3, 2012, Andy Griffith drew his final breath at his home on Roanoke Island, with Cindy holding vigil beside him. The death certificate listed not just the immediate cause, acute myocardial infarction, but also the underlying conditions that had been slowly claiming his life: coronary artery disease, hypertension, and hyperlipidemia. His body, which had entertained millions and endured decades of physical and emotional stress, had finally surrendered. Andy Griffith's last words to Don Knotts will break you. While Andy's relationship with Frances Bavier in what only the most meaningful last conversation. When Knotts was dying of lung cancer, Andy made the journey from his North Carolina home to Los Angeles to be at his oldest friend's bedside. In those final moments, Andy would speak words that revealed the deepest truth about their 5-decade friendship. As Don lay unconscious in his hospital bed, Andy leaned in close and whispered the encouragement that had always defined their relationship. "Breathe, breathe, keep breathing, Jess." He used Don's real first name, Jesse, something Don had always hated, but allowed only from his closest friend. But then Andy said something he had rarely expressed so directly in all their years together: "I love you." For a man who had struggled with expressing vulnerability throughout his life, these final words to Don represented a breakthrough. A moment when Andy Griffith the person transcended Andy Taylor the character and spoke from his heart without pretense or performance. Andy Griffith's final plan kept one last truth hidden forever. The speed of Andy's burial, just 5 hours after his death, shocked the entertainment world and left fans searching for explanations. Some speculated about health concerns or family disputes, but the truth was simpler and more profound. Andy Griffith had planned every detail of his farewell years in advance. He had made all the necessary arrangements and orchestrated every last detail of what would happen to his remains shortly after he would draw his last breath. This wasn't hasty grief or family dysfunction. It was the final act of a man who had lived his later years acutely aware of mortality and determined to control his legacy. Andy had seen how celebrity deaths could become circuses, how genuine grief could be overshadowed by media spectacle and public curiosity. By arranging for immediate burial in the private Griffith family cemetery on his beloved Roanoke Island, he ensured that his final moments would belong to his family alone. The secret Andy took to his grave wasn't scandalous, it was deeply human. He was afraid of being remembered as anything other than the gentle sheriff who had brought comfort to millions, even though his real life had been marked by struggle, pain, and regret. The rapid burial was his final protection of the Andy Taylor myth, ensuring that his complex humanity wouldn't overshadow the simple goodness he had represented on screen.
Why Andy Griffith's widow destroyed their home after his death. 1 year after Andy's death, Cindy Knight made a decision that further emphasized her late husband's desire for privacy. She had their Roanoke Island home completely demolished. Not everyone understood this choice, but those close to Andy recognized it as honoring his wishes, preventing the house from becoming a shrine or tourist attraction that would commercialize his memory. Since Andy's gravesite remains private and inaccessible to the public, fans seeking to honor his memory must travel to Mount Airy, North Carolina, where the Andy Griffith Museum serves as the official repository of his legacy. The museum, located just half a mile from his childhood home, houses the world's largest collection of Andy Griffith memorabilia, much of it collected by his lifelong friend, Annette Forrest. The museum contains actual props from the Andy Griffith Show in Matlock, wardrobe pieces donated by Andy and Cindy themselves, and personal items that tell the story of both his public career and private life. Among the most poignant displays are items related to Don Knotts and Frances Bavier, representing the complicated but ultimately loving relationships that defined Andy's professional family. His final words revealed the lesson he'd learned too late. The shocking secret that Andy Griffith carried to his grave wasn't a scandal. It was the simple, heartbreaking truth that the man who had spent his career embodying perfect paternal wisdom was, like all of us, profoundly human. His final words to Don Knotts, "I love you," represented the culmination of a lifetime spent learning to be vulnerable, to express emotion, and to value relationships over reputation. In his 1996 interview with Guideposts magazine, Andy had revealed his philosophy about pain and grace. Each of us faces pain, no two ways about it. But I firmly believe that in every situation, no matter how difficult, God extends grace, greater than the hardship, and strength and peace of mind that can lead us to a place higher than where we were before. These words, spoken during his recovery from Guillain-Barré syndrome, proved prophetic for his entire life journey. The secret Andy kept wasn't shame about his struggles. It was the deep understanding that his greatest contribution to the world was not his perfection, but his portrayal of the possibility of goodness. Sheriff Andy Taylor represented not who Andy Griffith was, but who he aspired to be. And in that aspiration, he gave millions of viewers permission to believe in kindness, wisdom, and moral clarity. Watch 20 behind-the-scenes secrets from the Beverly Hillbillies' final days, revealing cast tensions, surprising production choices, and little-known facts. Like this video and subscribe to be a part of our legacy-loving community. See you again.